Hello good people, if your reaction was something like this after watching that, you aren't alone because most people have no idea how the Rapier blood tree works. Luckily for you, I've created a fully original, super fun build where I get as close to min-maxing the Rapier's flourish and finish as possible. Before I jump into the deets, have a little clip montage to see if you like the build, timestamps for everything below as per usual. When the summer update dropped, I spent a lot of time finding new ways to make the Rapier as lethal as possible and tested so many minute details, and frankly I've never seen anyone play it like this. Now I want to make a few statements on this build. This is mostly terrible in duels because it's really difficult to get the setup down before they kill you, and you can't use pots like you normally would to bounce back after using on Defy Death and all that. You can definitely finesse some bruises, but overall dueling in this is not the most fun experience, especially against anyone ranged. In arenas this is definitely good, however it is very team reliant. Your team doesn't need to help you, all they need to do is take some of the enemy's attention and not die in 15 seconds, which is a lot to ask of 90% of my solo queue teammates. As long as you get the chance to apply a bleed or two in the midst of the team fight, it can be very rewarding. Queuing with a healer or at least a good bruiser to take some of the heat is a great idea. This is amazing in Outpost Rush because of how you can take advantage of your mobility and play it how you want, and also because it is so much easier to get your setup rolling when the people aren't, fully focused on you. And as for war, I actually did give it a try in one war. It wasn't really a serious war, and I found it actually worked pretty good. The cleanse pots were annoying at times with the 10-second cooldown. However, that 10-second cooldown is being increased to a 30-second cooldown, so cleanse pots will be less available, and therefore people are less likely to cleanse themselves just because they've got a few bleed stacks on them. But yeah, I found that it was pretty fun to run in war. I would never run it in a super serious war as of right now, but maybe if I got more comfortable using it, I would, and you'll actually see the war footage playing on screen. In general, this is not a bad build, but it is not meta or anything. To achieve what this build does, you're better off just going a spear or a void blade. However, this is just straight up fun to play and holds a lot of impressive outplay potential. You can use whatever secondary you want. I use the Hatchet because it provides me the most utility through survivability, allowing me to stay close and be greedy with my attributes. I don't use Ice Gauntlet because the whole intelligence elemental gemming does not maximize your bleed damage like an opal gem does, although Ice Rapier is very fun overall and I can drop a video on it. Spear could greatly boost your DPS, however I'm using 100 cons so I would die way too much with a spear. The bow is great, but you probably can't afford to play as close range or invest as many points into intelligence with it. The musket would give you the damage and the range, but you would be so squishy with no up close survival options, you're better off running the standard flash, evade, riposte. To kick off the skill trees, we're going to take a look at the hatchet. First things first, let's just get to the Defy Death ultimate by taking Berserk, and then the rest of the passives don't really matter since they apply to dealing damage and auto attacks, which we don't really do with the hatchet. I have tried this build with Infected Throw and might experiment with it more, however Rending Throw and Social Distancing feel a lot more fluid, so let's just pick up all the points in Social Distancing and Rending Throw. The second wind passive for Rending Throw is going to give us a really short cooldown on top of the already minimal cooldown. The Quick Power passive for Social Distancing is a really solid speed boost to have, and then of course a 1 second route to targets farther than 6 meters away. Don't forget that this ability will also cause a stagger and a 25% slow for 5 seconds by default. Then for our very last point, we want to take Adrenaline Rush, which is such a good passive that you need to remember you have when you're playing to maximize your stam bar. Essentially, anytime you land a rending or social distancing throw, your dodge rolls will cost 30 stamina for the next 2 seconds, which is actually quite a long time in combat. For our Rapier tree, let's take Tondo and note that the bleed deals 10% weapon damage for 12 seconds, and then let's pick up the Thirst for Blood and the And Again passives to make this cooldown really nice and quick. Then I take in Guard, Unerring, and all the points in Flourish, and the 10th point is really flexible, but let's just take the last Tondo point and then pick up Bloody End, which is where our big damage comes from. Now, I want you to have a careful look at each of the Flourish and Finishes passives. The first one here with Flare tells us that we gain grit on both Flourish and Finish, which is actually really important and will stop us from being staggered or knocked down from things like Sweep, Javelin, Wrecking Ball. So just note that you have that. An example of it will be played on screen, probably already has. The next one's Swagger. I honestly forget about this one and don't really notice it, but you gain 20 stamina when you successfully hit a target with Finish, which is quite nice, you know, thank you for that. And for Fuel, where it says each tick of damage from Tondo's bleed reduces the cooldown of this ability by 3.5%, this will not work if your Rapier is not in your hand. So if you do 2 stacks of Tondo, you're expected to get 7% cooldown reduction per second of bleed, but if you're holding out your hatchet, you're not going to be getting the cooldown reduction. Bloody End deals 150% of the remaining bleed damage you have left on a target. So let's just say you have 3 stacks of Tondo on a target, and one of them has 3 seconds remaining, the second has 6 seconds remaining, and the third stack has 9 seconds remaining. That's 18 seconds worth of 10% weapon damage bleed. So 18 seconds multiplied by 10% is 180% weapon damage, multiply that by 1.5 from Bloody End, and we have 270% weapon damage. There is also 90% weapon damage from the Flourish hit, and 120% weapon damage from the Finish hit, roughly giving us a 480% weapon damage hit, and I haven't even shown you how I min-max it yet. Next, we take all the points in Evade, and note that you can take Flèche or Riposte if you want to. I've tested all 3 and found that Flash just felt awkward and ineffective, and Riposte worked really good. However, I take Evade for its flexibility in use, whether it be getting out or going in, and for another important reason which I'll get into in the perk section. Finally, we take Red Curtains, Desperation, and Perfectionist for cooldown reduction and our favorite word, damage. My attribute split is 250 intelligence, 150 dexterity plus whatever bonus you have from upgraded gear, and then 100 constitution since we have a hatchet to keep us alive. This is inclusive of attribute food, and you can use any of the foods shown on screen. Now, if you're wondering why we use more intelligence than dexterity for our rapier, let's get out the damage calculator by Mixed Nuts, linked in the description by the way. Let's compare the Tondo bleed damage and the normal light attack damage between a 250 int 150 dex split and a 150 int 250 dex split. We don't care for the actual values on the site, just the percentage difference between the two. So obviously the high dexterity option is going to give us more damage, so why am I going for the higher intelligence option? Because of this beautiful passive right here, which does apply to Flourish and Finish. The difference in damage for the dex option is much less than the flat 30% boost this passive will provide us. Therefore, the value of this passive outweighs the extra damage we would otherwise receive. Our weapon and armor perks are really how we're going to min-max our DPS, so pay close attention here. Starting off with our Hatchet secondary, we want Refreshing Distancing Throw so that we have it up and ready as often as possible, and Keen Speed. Keen Speed will persist on weapon swap, however Refreshing Distancing Throw is the more important of the two, so just try for that. For our Rapier, in all my clips I'm using the Officer's Ceremony from the PvP track, however I've now replaced it with an omnidirectional evade and keenly empowered one, which you're all probably thinking, why on earth would you do that? Vicious and penetrating backstab on the officer's ceremony are deadly, however they won't actually increase our bleed damage. Our bleed damage is increased by sources of empower on us and sources of rend on our target. It is very important to know that when you are doing the actual flourish and finish, the empower that you have at that time will not increase the bleed damage. The bleed damage is increased by the empower you have at the time you apply the bleed stacks. I have personally tested this. That is why we take Keenly Empowered to have a pretty solid empower uptime, and with omnidirectional evade we can evade just before we use a Tondo to get a big empower on that. Also use an opal, because if your stamina is not full when you do the Tondo stack, that will be increased on your finish hit. So take an opal. A best in slot third perk for this build would be Immortal Empowerment or any other perk that helps with damage like Keen or Vicious for the sake of it. Keenly Jagged does not count towards bleed damage for flourish and finish, it is only Tondo stacks and I have tested this. Alrighty, moving on to armor. We have omnidirectional evade on our rapier, so we won't need it on the armor unless you couldn't find a rapier with omnidirectional evade. King Tondo is good, but it isn't a must-have. I take it anyway. Deadly Flourish is actually pretty terrible, and I don't even bother running it, but you can if you want. Our goal is to set up a big juicy burst to get someone from 100 to as close to 0 as we can in one hit, so it doesn't help when the perk only applies when they're under 50% HP. On top of that, it only applies to the initial flourish hit, not our second hit with finish where all our damage is coming from. With that being said, run it if you want, since combat is dynamic and there will be situations where you will use flourish on targets under half HP. We do not need any perks for the Hatchet except for refreshing social distancing, which we have on the weapon. For our general armor perks, stack that resilient as per usual, and if you have the luxury of extra perks, just go for any damage reduction you can, like physical and elemental aversion, shirking fortification or freedom. For our amulet, the champion's amulet will be great to boost our DPS with shirking and power, and then health and stamina recovery will help keep us alive. There are no strict guidelines for the amulet, but I feel this would work best. For our ring, you absolutely must have bloodletting. Bloodletting will boost our finish damage by 30%, and I have tested this, it is insane. Finish consumes our remaining bleed damage on hit, and if our bleed lasts 30% longer, they will deal 30% more damage, which is so sick. I use a 2-perker ring with bloodletting and invigorated punishment, since remember we are playing to max our bleed damage, and this perk will boost our Tondo's damage. A good third perk will be something like thrust damage, keen awareness, hardy, or anything really. Note that lifestealing does not proc off the big bleed burst. Finally, on our earring, this is fully up to personal preference, and I just like to have healthy toast, refreshing toast, and nimble. As an all-round tip, note that you can use healthy toast even if you aren't a caster, and it is so amazing for a mini health potion every 10 to 15 seconds. Also, for all of the clips in this video, I did not have my rapier min-maxed, because right now you'll see each bleed chunk will hit about 2.5k to 3k, but I've gotten it to a point where it hits for 3.5 to 4.2k. So stay tuned for that. I wasn't initially going to have this section in the video, but I think it'll be useful to talk about your actual gameplay and what sequence of actions will be most efficient. Offensively, with your rapier, you're going to want to try to roll and then evade just before you use your Tondo to proc your opal damage boost and omnidirectional evade in power, and just get that bleed damage number as high as you can. If the situation is tight and you cannot afford the setup, just using Tondo without these steps or one of them is fine. Then if it's someone like a healer, I will try to build 2 to 3 stacks as fast as I can to try to get a one shot, preventing them from self-healing. The best part is, they won't see you as a threat because they don't realize what you're doing, and in their eyes you're just applying little bleeds that they can brush off. For other targets, it's up to your personal discretion whether you want to build more stacks or just consume the single bleed you have. After applying a bleed, you need to decide quickly if you want to apply more or consume the amount that you have, as every second of bleed damage that passes is damage that you are losing on your flourish and finish hit. You can force your cooldowns to come back faster by spamming light attacks and evades, utilizing the Crescendo and Red Curtains passives. Defensively, you have evade and your Hatchet. Social distancing on the weapon itself is so convenient, and it makes you extremely slippery. Rending Throw can be used defensively, believe it or not, as if you lend it, the Adrenaline Rush passive will proc and you'll be able to perform 30 stamina dodges for 2 seconds. On top of this, the quick cooldown on Rending Throw means more chances to proc keen speed. And most importantly, our very useful Defy Death ultimate, which I love on this build. Just make sure you keep an eye on its cooldown timer on the top of your health bar to not get caught out without it, because the amount of times I've run in thinking I have Defy Death, I'm like, yeah, I'll be fine, you know, just like run into fucking 30 million people and then just die, no Defy Death. What you're seeing on screen right now is what it looks like when you apply all of the min-max buffs that I have told you guys about in this video. and what it looks like when you don't apply those, just to show you how much they really shake up this ability and lead to some crazy damage. Okay, that is all for this build. I procrastinated this video for so long because I wanted it to be perfect and I had so many clips and so much info to share. It was actually exciting for me to put the script together and just go through every little detail on how you can min-max your damage, because I genuinely don't think anyone has done this build as thoroughly as I have. So I hope you enjoy it and get the chance to try it. Anyway, I'll catch you all in the next one. Thank you for watching. Bye bye.